Welcome back to History Snapshots, and today finally marks the beginning of our first unit of the year, our archaeology unit. And this unit is filled with lots of hands-on activities and fun classroom exercises. But as you go throughout this unit, and especially as you watch this video, I want you to keep this question in mind. How do we learn about prehistoric societies? Okay, so make sure you keep that question in mind. And at the end of this video, you should be able to answer that question as well as define all the yellow highlighted terms, answer the questions in the forum below, and don't forget to write down something that confuses you so you can bring it up in class tomorrow. Hope you enjoy. So one way we can learn about prehistoric societies is by using a method called archaeology. Archaeology is the recovery and study of artifacts, ruins, bones, and fossils remaining from the past. Now, these fossils and bones that archaeologists study make up something that is called the archaeological record, and we'll get into this more in a little bit. But the important thing to know is by studying the archaeological record, archaeologists can learn many things about people of the past, such as how they lived, what they ate, what diseases they had, and even how they died. Let's take a look at how archaeologists begin to unlock the archaeological record, or those artifacts and bones that they're looking for. So, as you can imagine, most of the archaeological record is buried deep underneath the ground and is very hard to get to. So what archaeologists have to do most of the time is a process called excavation. And this is a process of where archaeologists dig up the remains of the past. And we'll get more into the details of excavation later in class, but just know that it's a method that archaeologists use to try to find those artifacts that are buried deep underneath the ground. Once archaeologists have located a site, they carefully remove the earth layer by layer. They divide the surface of the site into squares with grids, and if you look at the picture on the right, that is what this archaeologist has done. She has divided her site into very specific grids, and these grids will allow her to locate the exact place where she found an artifact or object. And when she finds these objects, she studies the remains that are found in various layers of soil and rock, and this is called stratigraphy. So why is this process so important? Why do archaeologists care so much about the remains that are found in various layers of soil and rock? Well, studying these layers themselves as well as the artifacts can give archaeologists clues about how the archaeological record was formed at different periods in history. But sometimes these clues aren't enough. Sometimes an archaeologist needs to find out even more information about the artifact they are exploring, such as how old is this artifact or when was it made. And one way an archaeologist can determine the age of an artifact is by using a method called cultural dating. And this method of dating requires the archaeologist to gather information about the society and culture from which the artifact came. So here's an example. Suppose someone's on an archaeological dig 3,000 years from now, and they're trying to figure out information about our society. And as they're digging through the earth and sifting through the layers of dirt, they come across a keychain with a picture of Taylor Swift's face on it. And this keychain doesn't have a date, it just has Taylor Swift's face. How could this person figure out when this keychain was made? Well, all they'd have to do was start looking at our culture and society and figure out that Taylor Swift was popular between the years 2005 and let's say 2020, and then the archaeologist could get a pretty good sense of how old that keychain was and when it was made. And this is called cultural dating. Now, as good as cultural dating can be, sometimes archaeologists want a more accurate way of determining the age of the artifact or object that they are looking at. And to get a more accurate dating on an object, the archaeologist has to use scientific dating, or a method that analyzes the artifact in a laboratory. So archaeologists bring in science and the latest technology to really, if they really want to determine exactly how old an artifact is, and we'll get into the specifics of that in a little bit. So here's an example of that scientific dating, and it's probably the most accurate form of dating that an archaeologist can use to determine the age of an artifact, and it's called radiocarbon dating, or a method that measures the amount of radioactive carbon in an artifact. And I know this sounds like a mouthful, and we'll explain it a little bit more when you get to class tomorrow, but one thing I want to say is don't worry too much about the science behind this all. The thing that's important to remember is this is just a scientific way for archaeologists to get a really, really accurate measurement of how old an artifact is. Okay, just know that if they really want an accurate picture, they'll use something called radiocarbon dating. Okay, so one of the final things I want you guys to keep in mind is that regardless of how archaeologists find their evidence, they are always going to interpret the evidence they find or the archaeological record in very different ways. In other words, archaeologists don't always see eye to eye, and you guys are going to get to experience that firsthand in our class activity. And then the final thing I want you guys to keep in mind is that nowadays archaeologists are really interested in figuring out what everyday life was like for normal people in prehistoric societies. And they do this by studying what is called the kitchen midden, which contains artifacts, bones, and other evidence of early human settlements. This allows them, by studying the kitchen midden, archaeologists are able to figure out what life was like for the ordinary people thousands of years ago. So there you have it. That concludes your second episode of History Snapshots. But before you X out of this video, make sure you, number 1, define all highlighted terms. Number 2, answer the questions in the forum below. And finally, number 3, write down something that confused you so you can bring it up in class tomorrow. Thanks for watching this episode, and I hope you enjoyed.